Hey everyone. My name is Bryn Lopez. I am the manager of Children's Book World in Los Angeles, and we are so excited to be here with one of our very favorite creative human beings, groundbreaking pioneer children's book author Lisa Yee, to talk with her about her multi-award winning middle grade novel, Maizy Chen's Last Chance. Look at all of this metal bling on the cover of your book. I think
Yeah.
there's even going to be more bling coming onto that book cover. This event is sponsored by our friends at Teach API, who help kids and communities navigate and celebrate their Asian American Pacific Islander heritage in schools and beyond. There's a particular focus this month because it is AAPI Heritage and History Month, but this is something that we want to celebrate all year round. So we're excited to be able to have this talk and share it with librarians and schools and all sorts of communities who have fallen in love with this particular book. How are you today, Lisa?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I can see all of your Maizy inspirations behind you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
terrific. You were born and raised here near Los Angeles or in the LA area. You attended Brightwood Elementary School in Monterey Park, Alhambra High School, and the University of Southern California. So, do you consider yourself at heart a California girl?
Oh, I'm definitely a California girl. And yeah, I mean, when I think of home, it's back in the LA area.
Yeah. And so you take that sort of California feel wherever you go, any environment you're in probably as well,
Well,
right?
well, if I can give you a confession, I spend winters in LA because right now I'm on the East Coast and I'm a wimp and I can't do cold weather. I need my sunshine. So I go
Yeah.
back every winter.
Yeah, and you're in a place where it really snows, like it gets really, really cold too,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Well, we'll talk about it, but Maisie is set in, though she lives in with her mom in California, it's set in Minnesota, which also gets some incredible snowstorms, though this takes place during the summertime, so we don't experience that. But that's a whole interesting side. I never thought about that with her grandparents,
Hmm.
what snows would be like in Last Chance. Um, I want to just talk about your other books. Your first books, the first trilogy, Millicent Man Girl, Genius, Stanford Wong, Flunks Big Time, and So Totally Emily Evers. Three books that summarized three preteens' experiences in Rancho Rosetta during the summer. Um, Real briefly about those books, the first book, Millicent Min, is 20 years old.
Oh.
How do you feel? What do people do different generations of kids still write you or talk to you about those books and the impact that they have on them?
They do, and what's interesting is now I'm getting all these letters and meeting people who read the books when they were younger, and now they're adults. I'm like, oh my gosh, how old am I now? But I mean, they tell me that for many of them, it was the first time that they saw a contemporary Asian protagonist in a book, or certainly on a book cover, and how much it meant to them. And it's funny because at the time when I was writing it, I was just writing a book. I wasn't thinking about
Mm-hmm.
the impact it would have later.
No, I mean that, but you really were. I feel like you were that that idea of being a pioneer about breaking ground. Though I think there were probably characters that existed and there were writers who were writing, but so much of it was historical fiction or that type of story. And just to have a story about kids being kids, going to school and having all sorts of failures and
A lot of
fantastic things as
failure.
well, a lot of failure because that's what middle school's about. It's incredible that you now have all these people who you write, you brought that to them. I'm so excited. I know we share a friend, Jean Yang, who's American born Chinese, is about to hit the airwaves this weekend.
I know, I know. I'm so excited about that.
Right? And I bet that's going to be another thing for people where they're seeing, because that's such a book about identity as well. And for people to be able to see that story, hear that story, connect with that story, is going to be an incredible thing.
Oh yeah, I can't wait.
But your newest book is Maizy Chen's Last Chance. It won the Asian American Pacific Literature Award for Best Book, the Newbery Honor, and was a National Book Award finalist. What did it feel like when those awards began? By the time you were through with that, I mean, how were you feeling about all that?
I I didn't know what was happening. I still don't know what is happening because it's the weirdest thing because when you're writing a book, you're you're by yourself. You're
Mm-hmm.
just sitting in your office with your toys and you're writing and you have no idea if anyone will like it, much less even read it. So when the accolades started coming in, I was stunned. I remember I remember when I got the you know, when I found out like about National Book Awards, it's like, is maybe it's a prank. Maybe somebody is pranking me, and this isn't really happening. I mean, it was so hard to wrap my head around all of that.
Yeah. And these are very, for those of you who don't know, all of these organizations are completely separate from each other. They are different groups of people, different groups of committees who are looking at the books, and there are so many books that you look at. So for Maisie to be chosen from all of these places, it means that just that her story that you wrote, the character that you created, had such an impact on people as they were reading it. I know for me personally, I by the time I was done with it, I was like, oh, this is the book. This is my book of the year because
Oh, thank you.
I really, and I read a lot, but I just felt like I got Maisie completely, and I loved it. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of Maisie Chen's Last Chance? For the few, most people have read this, but for the people who haven't read it yet.
Yeah, Maizy Chan's Last Chance is about a girl who was born and raised in Los Angeles, like I was, um, who goes to Last Chance, Minnesota, a place she's never been to before, to visit her grandparents, who she's only seen once and very briefly. And they own the only Chinese restaurant in town, the only Chinese restaurant around. And while she's there, she helps take care of her ailing grandfather, whom she calls Opa. And he starts teaching her poker and how to read a room and how to play poker. And the book is full of mystery and suspense and humor. It's about family and fun and quibbles and racism and relationships. I mean, it's kind of like a, like Chinese chow fun. There's a lot of ingredients in there and they all get tangled up together, but it's like a really good meal. So all of that happens to Maisie while she's in Last Chance, Minnesota, and she realizes that this place that she thought was so foreign to her is really just like home.
That's such a great analogy about the food and what the book is, and like so many special books. I mean, that's really what it's about. So many different lines of thought and ideas. You have historical aspects with Chinese history and immigration that are there. There's other parts of it which I thought we haven't touched on, but I loved that Maisie is her family is a single mom, and there's so many kids who have that kind of family with a single parent. It could be a mother or it could be a father, and themselves, and that is their family unit. And it could just be that is their family unit. It doesn't mean that they were married in that none of that. And I really love that representation. Was that something that you thought about when you know um, put that in there?
When actually in the first draft of the novel, Macy had a mom and dad. And then as the story started evolving, I really wanted to shore up the relationship with Maisie and her mom, and then Maisie's mom and her grandmother. And so I decided that Maisie's mom was going to be a single mom. And really the book is about family, but it's not necessarily blood relations either, because to me family is what you make of it. Family could be your neighbors, it could be your friends, it could be a stranger that you don't know yet that's going to be part of your orbit and part of your world. So by making the book about Maisie and her mom, I think it strengthened the story.
In you talk about it because when she moves to this community, Opa has a very good friend Werner, who is part of the Minnesota community, and they're on the outs. They're like brothers or siblings that don't want to talk to each other. Can you talk about that? And also where the names Oma and Opa come from?
Okay, so Oma and Opa are German for grandmother and grandfather, and Maisie is a Chinese American, as am I. And so because we're in my office, I'm gonna like reach over and take a picture off my wall. Um, so this is my mom's family,
What a great picture.
and that's my mom, and this is in the back of the book too. But when my grandparents came over, it was they came over from China in the 1920s. It was so important for them to be American. And what happened was they had a German midwife delivering their babies, and she was blonde, and to them she looked white. So to them it was like, she's American. So they had the German midwife name all their children, which is why I have an Uncle Otto, and Uncle Albert, Auntie Harriet, Auntie Verna, Auntie Leona. So they all had German names, and I kind of use that in the book as to why Maisie calls her grandparents Oma and Opa, because that has been in their family with the German name for grandmother and grandfather for generations, because it was the same kind of thing, wanting to be what they perceived was American.
That's such a part of particularly in the United States in the 20th century, immigrant communities that were coming into the United States. When they came in, they did want to try to adapt as quickly as they possibly could. And they would take on names that they saw on movies or in television or books or whatever it may be. And that's so interesting. But there's also a tradition of having an American name, but also still having a name that would be a Chinese name or a Korean name. Is that correct too within communities?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So now Maisie has never seen. Did you get to know your grandparents when you were young? Were you close to them?
I did actually. So on my mother's side, my grandmother and grandfather, they when my both my parents are public school teachers or were retired public school teachers, and so when they were at work, my grandmother and grandmother, Papa and Gung, they took care of me. So I got to know them very well, and it was interesting because they spoke Chinese and I spoke English, and yet we totally understood each other. And I mean, they spoke broken English, they spoke English also,
Hmm.
but sometimes they would speak to me in Chinese and I could understand them. And then sadly, as I got older, I couldn't understand them as well as when I was little. So that,
Isn't that interesting?
yeah.
Maybe part of that was I find like when you're little too, you connect with body language and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, that you can feel a sense of something in a way that you sort of lose that when you get older.
Yeah.
But it's probably something we should all have still, is being able to observe people's body language. Um, so I want to talk about um, first off the history that could you talk about the history that's inside the book? You talk about the past of Opa's family and how they actually came to the United States, and tell the history of many Chinese people during the 19th century who built America. They built the ability for things that we take for granted now, the ability to get from one part of the country to another part of the country. They built it and are responsible for that. And I would love for you to talk about that history that you've included in the book.
Yeah, so the book is actually it's a contemporary story, but then there's a historical aspect to it. And when Maisie is there, her grandfather starts telling her about her great great grandfather, Lucky Chen, who came over from China in the 1850s, and his job on the railroads and in San Francisco. And so we follow kind of two stories at the same time. And Maisie is learning all this stuff that she had no idea about. It was kind of like she's watching a movie, only it's of her whole family, about her great great grandfather working on the railroads. There were more than 20,000 Chinese who worked on the railroads, who helped create the western part of the Transcontinental Railroad. She learns about a thing called paper suns, something she didn't know about. And so she goes in the back of her grandparents' Chinese restaurant, the Golden Palace, and there's this wall that's very mysterious to her because it's black and white photos of young men, and she doesn't know who they are. And she later learns that they are young men that came over from China, and they had papers that said that they were the sons of residents of the United States. And because of those papers, it allowed them to come to the US. So she's learning about all this kind of stuff that she had no idea about, and she didn't even think to ask because she didn't know these stories were even there.
Mm-hmm. What I love about it is, and I've talked to kids about it who have real questions about this, where they were inspired by that history and your telling of it, because that's not something that you find in being taught in classrooms about the immigrant experience, particularly. You learn a lot about the history of a particular kind of American history where we talk about presidents, or we talk about the senators, or we talk about, particular business people and such and achievements, but we don't talk about the history of so many other people who came to this country. I wanted to continue on with the Paper Sons, the story of San Francisco and the earthquake, and how they were able to, because there were attempts to, you could talk about the Exclusion Act and the attempts to get rid of Chinese Americans in the United States.
Yeah, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which came about, you know, in like around 18, I think it was 1864, around there. They limited the number of Chinese people that could come to America to less than 200. And so that's why the paper sons came about, where they would get these documents and they would forge these documents and say that they had, because you could come over if you had a relative. And with the earthquake in San Francisco, which destroyed most of San Francisco, the silver lining was the thing that was also destroyed were all the records of all the immigrants, not just Chinese, but all the immigrants
Mm-hmm.
who had entered the US through San Francisco. So that opened the door for people to say, well, I was here and you had my records, but they got destroyed in the earthquake. And so that's how so many Chinese, got to come to America and became Chinese Americans.
It's so interesting to me. Think about this experience that we're talking about with Chinese Americans, certainly with Japanese Americans during World War II, who were put into encampments and imprisoned, and all of their things taken away from them, and their citizenship, basically every aspect of that. And also in the Latino communities in California, where they had come as workers and were working and had lives, and then in the 1920s and 30s were told to remove themselves from the country and go back to Mexico, though they'd never had an existence there. And you see it over and over and over again, this idea of being able, and we still have it going on today. A lot of the things that we have with book banning is about taking away people's identity. So why is it important now as an author, do you feel, to like people like yourself or Jean Yang or Jackie Woodson or Margarita Engel writing books about identity? Why is that important?
Oh, I think it's everything. And, so many times we think that we're alone, or that the questions we have about who we are or where we've been or who we're going to become, that nobody else has these thoughts. And when I was growing up in Los Angeles, Chinese American, I wasn't really thinking about that a lot until I moved to a part of the country where I was the only Asian person around. And people were asking me, where are you from? And I'd say, well, I'm from Los Angeles. And they're like, no, where are you from? I'm like, well, I'm LA. And they're like, where are you really from? I'm like, oh, where are my people from? And I would say that I was Chinese. But I started getting the feeling that people were looking at me as not an American, not I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and my parents were born and raised in America. And so it started me questioning for the first time about my lineage and did I belong here? Should I belong here? And the answer is yes, a resounding
Mhm.
yes. But it got me thinking and asking questions. And I wish I hadn't waited so long, and that like when my grandparents were around, I wish I had asked them more. But as a little kid, I was more concerned with, are we going to get ice cream today or what's going to happen? So I started talking to my parents, and I would encourage anyone, whether you've read Maisie or not, if you want to hear a great story, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, or talk to your neighbors and
Mhm.
ask them, what was it like when you were a kid? Because you're going to hear the most amazing things you've ever heard in your life.
Do you think, I'm curious, are there special things, ways to go about that? For instance, there are some parents or grandparents who might not want to talk. Grandpas in particular, maybe they went through a particular hard time, and they may not be. Is there a way of being able to ask these questions or bring it up to have this type of conversation?
Yes, I mean that's a great point, and you're right. A lot of the elderly in America, they don't want to talk about it. It wasn't necessarily a great time for them, or the way people came to the United States. They just they want to kind of set that aside. But instead of asking the big questions like, "How did you get here?" and "What were your struggles?" you might ask something like, "What did you like to eat when you were a kid?" You know, what did you like to do? What was your favorite thing to do on a Saturday? And that opens up a world of things. It's like Maisie and Opa, her grandfather, when they started talking, and then he starts teaching her how to play poker. So they started bonding over a gambling game, actually, and that forged their relationship.
Oh yeah, I have that. I had that with my own grandfather, who was so much older than I was. I mean, he was born in 1900. He was 70 when I was born, and or 67. And but dominoes, which is a very old school grandpa sort of game, right?
Not the pizza, but yeah.
No, no, not the pizza, not the pizza dominoes. An actual game with tiles. Like there's so many traditional things that are part of that. Food is very important. Food is an important part of your book and your books that you have done. Why is food such a special thing to write about?
I love food. I mean, just so I have a picture here. So like I've had many different careers, and
Hmm.
one of my careers was writing menus for Red Lobster. That's me in the back.
I
And
love
so
it.
um when I would write commercials, I would write TV commercials, and I would write things about food. There was always a food stylist on board, and that's the person who makes the food look great. And so that worked its way into Maisie's story. But I feel that food, it really it bridges the generations. I mean,
Hmm.
a great meal is just something that everyone can share, and whether or not they know each other. And I found this photo. This is of my mom and my grandpa and my dad and my great uncle Robert. Look at all that
I
food
love it.
on the
I
table.
love it.
So every Sunday, when I was young, all the relatives would meet at my grandparents' house, and everybody would bring food, and there was always a feast on the table. And so I remember that, you know, not just the food, but I remember as a little kid, I would sit under the table because you could listen to the grown-ups talk, and you could poke their feet and do all that kind of stuff. But food is another bond that I think that everybody has, no matter where you come from. It's something that you can put on the table and share.
Yeah, and that's something that those memories will stay with you forever. And food with Maisie and her grandparents is a part of the rituals of the things that bond them together. I wanted to talk. I know you love nature like I do. You love to go on walks and you love to be
Oh,
surrounded by
that's right.
nature.
Yeah.
And your father raised beautiful bonsai trees. And I wanted to share some of the images of them for you to talk about because and talk about bonsais in particular. I'm going to bring them onto the stage for us, and then they're going to come on right now, and I'm going to make them the focus. Here we go. Can you see now? Talk to us about these beautiful, beautiful trees.
So my dad is a bonsai master, and he was one of the creators of a species of cork jade plants, of cork jade bonsai plants. Because what he was doing one day was he was in his garden. It's this huge garden with all his bonsais, and there were bugs everywhere. So he sprayed them with DDT, which is a chemical that's been outlawed, and it killed so many things. But what happened is the jade plant, the base of it, started corking and had this texture, and so he became known as the father of the cork jade plant. And I love the fact that, like, one time he said that he could look at a young plant and he could know what it was going to be like in 50 years.
Wow.
And so that is a way of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Plants will outlive us. They have their own stories to tell. And to me, it's kind of like generational. It's kind of how Opa tells Maizy the story of her great-great-grandfather, because it's passed along. But this is something live that is passed along through generations.
And how old are some of these trees that we see here?
Really old. Older than me, so it's really, really old. I mean,
wow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably, 60, 70, maybe even older than that.
And I see a character from Maizy, the book, peeking out of this bonsai tree. Who is that?
Okay. Here he is.
Bud.
This is Bud the bear, and he features prominently in the story. He goes missing at one point. And so I post these things on social media and on my website, lisayee.com, where Bud is hiding in pictures, and I challenge the readers to find Bud. So
yeah, he's sitting here at another one, right? He's right at the front of there.
That's Bud the bear. Yep.
Now this looks, from the perspective, it looks gigantic, but it's not that big.
Yeah, if you can see how big Bud really is, you can see how big that bonsai tree is. It's actually quite small. And if you look at the bonsais, they're miniature, they're small. But the bigger the base, the bigger the roots are, the older they are.
Ah, it is just such a magnificent. How many do you think he has? And this is his, like, a backyard. And this is the home you grew up in, right?
Yes, in Monterey Park. Yes, hundreds and hundreds.
Wow,
so
beautiful.
I remember once trying to count as a kid, but I gave up.
We're going to go through. Each one is so unique. It is like a snowflake.
Yes. Yeah, there are no two that are alike.
And the sculptures that are in them are so interesting as well. I'm going to go through, because I also had a picture of his rock sculptures. Yeah,
he also did these rock sculptures where he would get these rocks and he would place them, and he would, he had this eye where he could look at things and he could determine what the front of something was and things like that. And it's the same thing like at the Golden Palace, the restaurant that's been in Maizy's family forever. Her grandparents and great grandparents and before that, it's the same thing when you're creating a dish or you're creating a food, how it's going to look. And then her mother, who's a food stylist, brings another level to it by adding small little touches to the dish that you already thought was perfect. And so that's kind of like, I think, what my dad did with the bonsais. The bonsais, the plants come from nature. The plants are Mother Nature's gifts. But then he would just trim them away and make them look the best they could be.
Did he have other friends that he shared this passion with, of creating the bonsai trees?
Yes, he often spoke at at the Arboretum or Huntington Gardens or places like that. Um, if you're interested in bonsai, you just Google his name, Frank Yee, and he's got this one YouTube video that has over 100,000 views.
Wow.
I don't know how to get those numbers, you know.
He's an influencer.
Yes,
So that is wonderful. I can't wait to be able to look at that. It's just so magical. And that's part of, and also the bonsai trees and the rock sculptures are such a important part of AAPI culture as well, within many different cultures within the AAPI stories. And that was also a way, I think, for immigrants to be able to continue to have a part of their culture when they came to a new place, right?
exactly. You bring it over. It's a part of you. It's in your blood. It never really leaves you.
Yeah. So I would just like to know, as we wrap up, I just wanted to know about what it has been like in this experience of from the beginning of writing this book now to it's in paperback. The only other thing we need, maybe a movie. We made a movie or a mini series, right? But what has this experience been like for you?
It has been.
I'm
It
going
has
to
been
take this back off. I'm going to just unfocus this real quick, and so we can see you.
okay.
There we go.
It writing this book was the hardest thing I've ever done. You know, because I dug so deep into not just my past, but the past of Chinese immigrants in America and setting the book starting in China. It was so difficult because I was also writing during the middle of COVID. And so there was a lot of a hate against Asians happening. And it made it even harder for me to write. At one point, I just couldn't even write. I was just too busy crying. And I wanted to think of like, how can I help my community? What can I do? And I realized, well, I can keep writing. And so getting to the finish line on the book, and it was also, you know, people think of you know it's only the author, but I had a lot of people behind me. I had an expert on Chinese food and Chinese customs and the railroads and everything. I wanted to get everything right, so we had all this team of people working on the book, and by the time it came out, I was just exhausted. And then to have this out now, it's been like a little over a year. I can't believe I did it. I can't. It's like, wow, I wrote that book. You know.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like it's one now. It's one of your kids. Do you consider these books to be like your?
I do. My daughter once pointed out, I think she wrote an essay about it for school because you had to write about your family or something. And she said, my mother sits around the dinner table and talks about characters in her books like they're real people. Because I remember like, I was writing Stanford, Wong Flung's Big Tongue with the Sun, and you know, at the time I'm like, you won't believe what Stanford did today. And I truly, I think of all of them as my babies.
I love that. That's a great author story, and that's just so wonderful. I really appreciate your sharing all of this thoughtfulness and inspiration with us, Lisa. Now, I'm going to leave it with knowing that there's another new series on the horizon with our good friend Dan Santat. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So Dan and I are actually really good friends. Oh wait, wrong picture. Here we are. We're actually very good friends. We met each other well over 20 years ago before either one of us was published. So the series is called The Misfits. The first book out is The Misfits, A Royal Conundrum, and it's a mystery. It's set on an island in San Francisco. It's kind of like Alcatraz, and there's this old castle turned high security prison, which is now a reforming art school. It's 5 misfits who get thrown together, and they find out that things aren't as they seem to be, and they aren't as they thought they were, and they try to solve the biggest heist of the century. And Dan is the illustrator on that book. It's a middle grade series, and I'm so excited about it. And it's so different from Maizy.
That is so exciting. I can't wait for that. I love both of you, and having you together is an incredible thing. It is so wonderful to be your friend and to have you be part of our children's book world community, but also the community of authors and children's book writers. Your impact is endless. It's just, I know so many people who love your work, and I'm sure you hear about it all the time. But thank you so much for being you, Lisa Yee.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we'll see you all again. We will be doing this again next fall. We'll have so many more authors to bring to you with their important stories. But thank you for this last school year, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you all. Bye-bye.